May 1972. The tropical heat hit like a physical force the moment Second Lieutenant Steve Ladd stepped off the transport at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base in northeastern Thailand. He was 23 years old, fresh from flight training, and about to begin the most intense year of his life flying combat missions in the F-4 Phantom over Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The air base stretched before him, rows of Phantoms baking under the merciless sun, ground crews swarming over aircraft, the smell of jet fuel and hot asphalt mixing with the humid jungle air. This was it. This was what he'd trained for. Ladd had fallen in love with the F-4 Phantom months earlier at Ubon Air Force Base during pilot training. A combat crew brought a Phantom for demonstration, and the moment he saw it, something clicked. "I took one look and decided that's what I wanted to fly," he would later recall. The F-4 wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Fellow pilots called it double ugly or Rhino, but to Ladd it was magnificent. Massive twin engines, swept wings, that distinctive nose drooping slightly forward like a predator ready to strike. The Phantom was unlike anything else in the sky. It could carry more weapons than World War II bombers while flying at twice the speed of sound. It could engage enemy fighters with missiles, drop bombs on ground targets, perform reconnaissance missions, and deliver nuclear weapons if needed. No other fighter, before the F-4 or since, has approached the versatility and resilience of the Phantom, Ladd later wrote. This wasn't pilot bravado. It was simple fact. The F-4 Phantom II was the defining fighter aircraft of the Vietnam War era. But versatility came with complexity. The F-4 had quirks that could kill inexperienced pilots. One of the most dangerous was adverse yaw. During hard maneuvering, aggressive control stick inputs could cause the aircraft to snap roll in the opposite direction from the intended turn. Pilots had to learn a counterintuitive technique, stomp on the rudder pedals to turn rather than relying on the stick alone. Get it wrong in combat, and you were dead. The aircraft demanded respect, constant vigilance, and muscle memory that had to be perfect under stress. Ladd's first missions began almost immediately after arriving at Ubon. He flew as a wingman initially, learning from more experienced pilots who had already survived dozens or hundreds of missions. The F-4 required a two-man crew, pilot in front controlling the aircraft, weapons systems officer in back managing radar, navigation, and weapons. This crew coordination was life or death. If pilot and WSO couldn't function as one unit under combat stress, they didn't survive long. The war Ladd entered in 1972 was ferocious. President Nixon's Vietnamization policy was withdrawing American ground troops, but air power remained central to strategy. Operation Linebacker, a massive bombing campaign against North Vietnam in response to their Easter offensive, created some of the most intense aerial combat of the entire war. Phantoms, Thunder Chiefs, B-52s, and other aircraft flew thousands of sorties against an enemy that had spent years building one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in history. North Vietnam's defenses were terrifying. Surface-to-air missile sites with Soviet SA-2 guideline missiles ringed the country, capable of reaching aircraft at 60,000 feet and ranges of 25 miles. Anti-aircraft artillery, from small guns to massive 85mm and 100mm cannons, created deadly curtains of flak over cities and military targets. North Vietnamese MiG fighters engaged American aircraft in dogfights that tested everything. American pilots called the most heavily defended area around Hanoi Route Pack 6. The heart of hell, where surviving was an accomplishment in itself. A typical mission began hours before takeoff with intelligence briefings. Crews learned their target, a bridge, supplied depot, airfield, true concentration, and studied reconnaissance photos, weather forecasts, enemy defenses, routes they would fly. Mission planners varied approach paths and timing to avoid patterns, but there were only so many ways to reach targets deep in enemy territory. The North Vietnamese knew where American aircraft had to fly and positioned defenses accordingly. Pre-flight preparations were meticulous. Ground crews inspected every system, fueled aircraft, loaded weapons, bombs, rockets, missiles, depending on the target. Pilots and WSOs performed their own checks, verifying all systems functioned. Survival gear was extensive. G-suit to prevent blackout during high-G maneuvers, survival vest with radio, flares, medical supplies, water, pistol for evasion if shot down. Every pilot knew being shot down meant either dangerous rescue by helicopters or years as a POW enduring torture. Takeoff from Ubon was often in formation, multiple F-4s launching in sequence to join up for the mission. The flight into enemy territory took an hour or more depending on target location. During transit, pilots maintained formation, monitored fuel, scanned sky for enemy aircraft. Communication was constant, checking with AWACS aircraft, coordinating with other strike packages, receiving threat and weather updates. Tension built steadily as they approached the target area. As formation neared the target, enemy radar began tracking them. SAM sites prepared to launch. Electronic warfare aircraft tried jamming enemy radar. Wild Weasel missions, specialized F-4s and F-105s equipped to hunt SAM sites, worked to suppress air defenses. But North Vietnamese were skilled at avoiding destruction, often turning radar off until last moment or using optical tracking to avoid revealing positions. The weapons delivery run defined every mission, diving toward the target while surrounded by anti-aircraft fire and evading missiles. Ladd described it as controlled chaos. The pilot focused simultaneously on multiple tasks, maintaining formation, identifying target, setting attack angle and speed, releasing weapons at precise moment, pulling out of dive while maneuvering violently to avoid being hit. All this while SAM warnings screamed in the headset and flak exploded in black bursts around the aircraft. The SA-2 surface-to-air missile was particularly terrifying. When launched, it appeared as a flying telephone pole, trailing flame and smoke, accelerating to Mach 3.5 as it climbed toward its target. Radar warning receivers alerted pilots when locked onto, giving precious seconds to react. The standard evasion was to wait until the missile was close, very close, then execute a hard brake turn, forcing the missile to attempt a turn it couldn't complete due to speed and momentum. Timing was everything. Brake too early and the missile adjusted. Brake too late and there wasn't time to evade. Pilots watched SAM streak toward them, waiting, then yanking the stick hard, pulling maximum G-forces, feeling the aircraft shudder at the edge of its performance envelope as the missile flashed past, sometimes close enough to see. It was pure terror requiring absolute discipline. Panic meant death. Anti-aircraft artillery presented a different challenge. Unlike missiles you could see and evade, AAA filled the sky with thousands of shells exploding at preset altitudes, creating deadly clouds of shrapnel. Pilots saw black puffs of exploding shells and knew each represented hundreds of steel fragments traveling at high velocity. There was no evading AAA once airborne. You simply flew through it, hoping odds favored survival. Aircraft returned to base riddled with holes, hydraulic fluid leaking, control surfaces damaged. Ladd flew missions across the full spectrum of F-4 combat operations. He struck targets in North Vietnam during linebacker, encountering the heaviest defenses. He flew interdiction missions along the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, trying to disrupt supplies to communist forces in the south. He supported ground forces in South Vietnam and Cambodia with close air support, dropping bombs and firing rockets against enemy positions threatening American or South Vietnamese troops. Each mission type had unique challenges and dangers. The psychological toll of flying combat day after day, week after week, month after month was crushing. Every mission carried the possibility of death. Ladd watched friends shot down, some rescued, some killed, some captured and taken to brutal prison camps where POWs were tortured. The stress was cumulative and relentless. Pilots dealt with it differently: humor and bravado, alcohol, quiet introspection. Fighter pilot culture encouraged fearlessness, but everyone felt the fear. Between missions, life at Ubon alternated between intense boredom and equally intense revelry. When not flying, pilots lived in strange limbo, waiting for next mission, attending briefings, maintaining proficiency in simulators and training flights, trying to find ways to relax and decompress. The Officers Club became the center of social life where pilots gathered to drink, tell stories, and bond with men whose lives depended on mutual trust in the air. That brotherhood was essential for survival. Combat flying is fundamentally teamwork. Wingmen protect each other, calling out threats and providing mutual support in engagements. In the F-4 specifically, pilot and WSO had to function as single organism, each trusting the other completely. Ladd developed profound respect for men he flew with, both pilots and WSOs who shared danger but had no control over aircraft and had to trust their pilot's skill to bring them home. The missions accumulated. 50 missions, 100 missions. The Air Force had tradition from World War II of recognizing mission milestones. In earlier Vietnam phases, pilots flying over North Vietnam rotated home after 100 missions because odds of being shot down increased dramatically with each sortie. By Ladd's time, policy had evolved, but 100 missions remained psychological milestone. Proof survival was possible. Ladd passed 100 and kept flying. 150 missions. 175. 200. Each mission was another roll of the dice, another entry into airspace where missiles and guns waited. Each landing was another small miracle. Aircraft intact, crew uninjured. One more mission survived. The statistics accumulated with brutal mathematics. At some point, most combat pilots who flew this many missions experienced at least one close call resulting in significant damage or emergency procedures. Yet Ladd kept beating the odds. He flew over North Vietnam, where SA-2s and MiGs created the most dangerous environment of the war. He flew over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, navigating mountains and weather to strike supply convoys. He flew over South Vietnam and Cambodia, providing close air support to troops in desperate firefights. He saw aircraft shot down, watched parachutes descend into enemy territory, heard distress calls from pilots who wouldn't be rescued. He felt the thud of shrapnel hitting his aircraft and the terror of two missiles tracking him through the sky. He experienced the physical punishment of sustained high-G maneuvering, blood draining from head toward legs, vision narrowing to tunnel, G-suit inflating to force blood back up, fighting to stay conscious while simultaneously flying the aircraft and evading threats. The human body wasn't designed for this. The F-4 Phantom could pull 5 Gs. Pilots blacked out at 5 or 6 without proper technique. But through it all, through skill, luck, and the robust design of the F-4 Phantom, Ladd survived. Mission 150. Mission 175. Mission 200. By the time he completed his 204th and final combat mission, he had accumulated over 400 hours of combat flying time. More than many pilots flew in entire careers. More than most people could comprehend enduring. 204 times entering enemy airspace. 204 times returning alive. The statistics are staggering when considered cumulatively. 204 combat missions meant 204 takeoffs and landings, each an opportunity for mechanical failure or pilot error. It meant 204 entries into enemy airspace where missiles and guns waited. It meant hundreds of weapons delivery runs requiring precise flying while surrounded by enemy fire. It meant 204 successful navigations through some of the most heavily defended airspace in military history. When his combat tour ended, Ladd rotated back to the United States. The transition from combat flying to stateside assignment was disorienting. The intensity of combat missions, the constant adrenaline, the life-and-death stakes, all disappeared, replaced by routine peacetime military operations. Many Vietnam veterans described feeling lost after returning home, struggling to find purpose in activities that seemed trivial compared to combat. For fighter pilots like Ladd, the challenge was finding satisfaction in flying when every flight didn't involve someone trying to kill you. But Ladd's career was far from over. His experience in Vietnam and demonstrated skill as combat pilot opened doors to advanced assignments. He served in Europe during the height of the Cold War, flying F-4 Phantoms as part of NATO's defense against the Soviet Union. These assignments lacked immediate danger of Vietnam combat, but carried their own weight. Knowledge that any war with Soviets would likely involve nuclear weapons and end of civilization. Later in his career, Ladd transitioned to the A-10 Warthog, a radically different aircraft designed specifically for close air support. If the F-4 Phantom was about speed, altitude, and multi-role capability, the A-10 was about low-altitude survivability and devastating ground attack. The A-10 was built around its primary weapon, a 30mm GU-8 Avenger rotary cannon capable of destroying tanks with depleted uranium rounds. Slow compared to Phantom, subsonic and vulnerable to modern fighters, but in its intended role, unmatched. Ladd found the A-10 to be a completely different flying experience. The A-10 was a delight to fly. Responsive and highly maneuverable with superb cockpit visibility and a devastating weapons load, he later wrote. The close air support mission, which he'd experienced from F-4 during Vietnam, became his primary focus. The close air support mission, to me, is the most challenging of all. There is no greater reward than knowing you've saved teammates on the ground from being decimated or overrun by an enemy. One incident from his A-10 career particularly stands out. On his final flight in the Warthog, Ladd led a four-ship formation to a tactical gunnery range in Nevada desert where they unleashed full array of weapons the A-10 carried against ground targets. On flight home, flying at 100 feet above ground in tactical formation, Ladd felt an irresistible urge. A little devil popped up in my head. "You've never done it. Do it," he demanded. I caved immediately. He pulled the nose up sharply and performed a slow, smooth victory roll over Nevada trailer homes. It wasn't as graceful as a Spitfire or Mustang in the movies, but by God, it was exhilarating, he later wrote. It was a moment of pure joy, celebration of career spent mastering demanding aircraft and surviving combat that killed so many others. A final gesture of defiance and triumph from a fighter pilot who had earned the right. Ladd flew the A-10 for thousands of hours, eventually accumulating approximately 4,400 total flight hours split evenly between the F-4 Phantom and A-10 Warthog. This extraordinary breadth of experience, mastery of two iconic but completely different fighters, gave him unique perspective on military aviation and evolution of tactical air power. He served as squadron commander and held other leadership positions, sharing combat experience with younger pilots and shaping next generation of fighter aviators. Ladd retired from the Air Force as colonel after 28 years of service. His decorations included the Distinguished Flying Cross, awarded for heroism or extraordinary achievement in aerial flight, among numerous other medals recognizing combat service and leadership. He had earned Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees during his career, balancing academic study with demands of operational flying. By any measure, he had achieved success in his chosen profession, but the experiences stayed with him. Combat leaves marks that never fully fade. Years after Vietnam, Ladd decided to write about his experiences, producing memoir titled From F-4 Phantom to A-10 Warthog, Memoirs of a Cold War Fighter Pilot. His motivation was partly personal, way to process and preserve memories before they faded, and partly professional. I had 28 years' worth of stories to tell, he explained. The challenge was making the book accessible to general readers while maintaining technical accuracy, though it satisfied other fighter pilots. Not so simplistic that my brothers in the job will heap scorn upon the book, yet not so complex and parochial that the other 99% of the population will cast it aside in confusion, he wrote. It was delicate balance, technical enough to be credible, human enough to be compelling. The book achieved that balance. It provided technical details about flying F-4 and A-10, combat tactics, realities of air warfare, but also captured human dimension: fear, camaraderie, losses, exhilaration, toll. Reviews praised it as one of more honest accounts of what it meant to be fighter pilot during Vietnam era. Unlike some memoirs that gloss over difficulties or emphasize heroics, Ladd's account acknowledged complexity of experience. He gave talks about his experiences, sharing lessons learned with military audiences and helping civilians understand what fighter pilots do and why. In one interview, he was asked about people he flew with. His answer captured essence of fighter pilot culture. "I've had the opportunity to lead and follow some of the most impressive human beings on the planet. You won't recognize their names. They never achieved fame or fortune, but they believed in their profession and wrung every ounce of performance out of the aircraft they flew and the life they led." This was the brotherhood Ladd valued most. Not the medals or the rank or the recognition, but the bonds forged with men who understood what it meant to fly combat. Men who had faced the same fears, survived the same dangers, lost the same friends. Men who knew that fighter pilots weren't superhuman. They were human beings doing an inhuman job and somehow finding the strength to continue. The F-4 Phantom that Ladd flew with such distinction continued in service for decades after Vietnam. Though eventually replaced by newer fighters like F-15 and F-16, the Phantom remained operational in various air forces around the world well into the 21st century. Its combination of versatility, durability, and raw power ensured its place in aviation history. For 4 decades, it remained at the very top of the fighter totem pole, Ladd wrote. That longevity validates the affection pilots like Ladd felt for aircraft. Looking back on his 204 combat missions decades later, Ladd expressed pride in what he and fellow pilots accomplished, but also clear-eyed understanding of what combat flying cost. The Phantom totally surpassed expectations. It dazzled me every time I took it up, but he also acknowledged terror, losses, luck required to survive. Fighter pilots maintain culture that values bravado and downplays fear, but Ladd's honesty about reality of combat sets his account apart. There's a tendency to romanticize fighter pilots, to see them as fearless warriors, modern knights jousting in sky. The reality is more complex and more human. Fighter pilots feel fear like anyone else. They just learn to function despite it, to make split-second decisions while terrified, to fly precisely when everything screams at them to run. This courage, not absence of fear, but action despite fear, is what defined pilots like Steve Ladd. The 204 missions represent not just numbers, but 204 opportunities for death that Steve Ladd survived through combination of flying skill, resilient F-4 Phantom, and indefinable quality called luck that separates those who make it home from those who don't. Each mission was calculated risk. Each return was small miracle. Multiplied 204 times, it becomes achievement that few can comprehend and fewer still could replicate. Vietnam was a different kind of war for fighter pilots. In World War II and Korea, air superiority was achieved relatively quickly, and most missions involved ground attack against limited air defenses. In Vietnam, sophisticated surface-to-air missiles and capable enemy fighters created sustained aerial combat that tested American pilots and aircraft throughout war. The North Vietnamese learned and adapted, making defenses more effective as war progressed. Pilots like Ladd faced enemy that shot down hundreds of American aircraft. The loss rate was sobering. Over 900 F-4 Phantoms lost to all causes during Vietnam War, about half to enemy action. Every pilot knew the statistics. Every pilot knew friends who hadn't come back. Yet they kept flying because mission demanded it, because comrades depended on them, because professional pride wouldn't allow anything less. The psychological burden of sustained combat flying cannot be overstated. Unlike ground troops who experience combat in intense bursts followed by periods of relative safety, fighter pilots experience danger on every mission. The concentration required to fly complex aircraft, navigate to targets, evade defenses, deliver weapons accurately, and return home safely was mentally exhausting. Multiply that by 204 missions, and the cumulative strain becomes almost unimaginable. Yet Ladd and thousands like him did it. They woke up each morning knowing they might die that day. They suited up, pre-flight aircraft, and flew into enemy fire. They watched tracers arc toward them, felt aircraft shudder from near-miss explosions, heard warning tones indicating missile lock. They pressed attacks despite danger, delivered weapons despite fear, brought damaged aircraft home despite odds. This was routine for them. This was the job. The close calls accumulated along with missions. Aircraft damaged by flak, but still flyable. Missiles evaded by split-second timing. MiG encounters resolved without losses. Mechanical failures managed successfully. Whether that should have been impossible penetrated somehow. Each close call was story worth telling, but after 204 missions, there were too many to count. Survival became matter of probability. Keep rolling dice enough times, and eventually luck runs out. Except Ladd's luck held. Looking at his career arc, from young second lieutenant arriving at Ubon to colonel retiring after 28 years, it's clear that those 204 combat missions shaped everything that followed. They prove his skill under ultimate test. They earned respect of fellow pilots. They provided credibility when he led squadrons and mentored younger aviators. The lessons learned flying combat in F-4 Phantom over Vietnam informed every aspect of his subsequent career. When Ladd transitioned to A-10 Warthog, he brought combat-tested understanding of close air support mission. He knew what troops on ground needed because he'd provided it under fire. He knew how to deliver weapons accurately in contested airspace because he'd done it hundreds of times with missiles tracking him. He knew how to lead pilots in combat because he'd survived when others hadn't. His Vietnam experience gave him authority that couldn't be taught or faked. The final word on Steve Ladd's 204 combat missions belongs to him. The F-4 dazzled me every time I took it up. Despite the terror, despite the losses, despite the grinding stress of sustained combat flying, he never lost his love for the aircraft and the mission. That passion sustained him through years of combat and career that followed. It's what separates those who simply survive from those who excel. Steve Ladd flew 204 combat missions in F-4 Phantom over Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia during one of the most intense periods of aerial warfare in history. He survived when many didn't. He went on to distinguished career flying A-10 Warthog and serving in leadership positions. He retired with honors, wrote about his experiences, and contributed to understanding of what fighter pilots endure in combat. His story is one of skill, courage, luck, and unbreakable bonds forged between men who face death together. For anyone seeking to understand what fighter pilots experienced during Vietnam War, Steve Ladd's story provides window into that world of incredible machines, extreme danger, profound camaraderie, and human cost of air combat.